Chapter 1. Misa's boots left imprints in the dark, cracked dirt. If it was dirt, it probably wasn't. The Rockwood slums were notoriously filthy. Pulling the hood around her tight black curls, Misa turned down an alley between the little shanty homes. Mosquitoes and fat moonflies bit at her arms and face. The hot night air smelled worse than the backside of a birch pig, but she was able to ignore it. She had a Sinatra song happily stuck in her head. Humming, she passed a drunken form on a stoop, trying to remember the lyrics and the title. She could hear the big band brass as the drunk drew a knife and stumbled to his feet. He grunted and dove at her. Misa whirled around as the attacker's hand grazed her shoulder. Her fingers delicately tapped the greasy skin of his bare cheek. The attacker dropped the knife as his eyelids fluttered, instantly collapsing into a deep sleep. Catching the heavy man, Misa was overwhelmed by the vagabond's rancid stench. She lowered him to the ground, the pleasant big band melody fading from her mind. "Cookie, not you too," she murmured as she studied the face of her attacker. A decade before, the cat-eared Ailuro had been the head cook of Castle Aurumice. Time had worn the tiger stripes on his face into deep furrows of gray. A gentle, soft-spoken man, with a penchant for rich, decadent desserts. All the castle children had adored him. "I'm sorry this has happened to you," Misa murmured, drawing a satchel full of coins from beneath her cloak. "I promise this nightmare will be over soon, and everyone will go back to Aurumice." The city of Treballis had been unkind to the castlefolk in their time of exile, barring them from owning land. On the streets, the people hissed that the castlefolk had a bad aura, bringing darkness wherever they went. It was a lie. There was nothing magically different about the castlefolk. The government officials held a vendetta against them. One by one, the castle's people had fallen to disease, death, and crime. The young woman attached her coin satchel to Cookie's worn leather belt, then placed her fingertip to his furry, wrinkled forehead. Magic flowed as gentle as a forest dream. The dream spinner brought the old man back to the golden days of Aurumice, to the days before the terror magic emptied the halls and the energy field entombed the castle. She pulled a few memories forward and brought Cookie to the days of the glorious harvest festivals. The kitchens exploded with warm, decadent aromas. She added her mother's old record player in the great dining hall and placed the Sinatra record back on the turntable. Cubs laughed as they ran down the hallways into the beautiful dining room. Over 100 people gathered, some her family by blood, others her family by the kinship of the castle. The magic tattoo on their backs tied them together, and the great Castle Aurumice was their sanctuary. Misa reluctantly pulled herself out of the dream and climbed to her feet. With a heavy heart, she left the tiger man lying on the filthy street, hoping no pickpockets would wander through. She had an important message to deliver, and time was short. As the twin moons started to ascend into the darkening sky, Misa traveled through a few more alleyways to a small unlabeled tavern house. Warm light spilled out of the open door. She removed her hood and was immediately tackled by shouting cublings.
"Misa, the fair is this week! Misa, play your violin! Please, 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 spin us a dream!"
Misa laughed, entangled in castlefolk cubs. "Leave that girl be," Alba bellowed from behind the tavern counter. She was a short old cat in a colorful apron. Somehow, despite all the dirt and wretchedness of Rockwood, Alba managed to keep her downy fur white. Misa had captured the eyes of all the tavern occupants. About a half-dozen men and women, all the same ashen gray and brown. Even in the small gathering, the old castle's diversity was well represented. Some people were pure Ailuro, a race who stood as tall as humans but boasted rich fur, muzzled noses, and feline-like features. Then there were sapiens, those who were furless, short-nosed, and to any outside observer, simply human. Misa was between the two races. Her eyes were cat-like, her teeth fanged, and her fingers clawed and deadly. Abriana, the girl on Misa's right arm, started playing with her curly hair and touching her collection of earrings.
So pretty,
Abriana breathed. She was a girl as black as a Calamorian rose.
You can have them if you'd like.
Misa placed Abriana down and settled into a rickety chair. She carefully took a few jewels from her ears, handing them to the children. Gibberty sauntered up, collecting his tawny daughter from the pack.
Misa, we don't need trinkets and charity. We need our home back,
he growled. The lion man was always cross and somewhat drunk. In the glory days of the castle, he had been an apprentice to the glazier and a maker of brilliant stained glass windows. In the streets of Trebalis, Gibberty made his wage selling dung larvae.
I'm working on it.
Misa flashed her ever-present grin.
Nico and I are so close to breaking that energy field.
What if the energy field comes back after you break it? If the full mages of Castle Nova couldn't destroy it, why can you?
The mages of Castle Nova stopped caring years ago. I haven't, and I know I'm going to figure it out.
She didn't tell Gibberty her father had made the force field, so she had a small advantage over any other mage who tried to untangle the magic. Alba placed a bowl of food in front of her, and Misa blanched at the sight of the sloppy gruel. It was the color of the street outside. She could not refuse Alba's hospitality. The white-furred woman was a castle elder, and even outside the walls, commanded respect.
Where are your brother and Nico?
Gibberty questioned.
I've never seen either of them set foot in Rockwood.
They are working hard helping me figure out this magic. I promise you.
Misa lied.
In fact, that's why I'm here tonight. They wanted you to know that we're closer than we've been before. These cubs will know what it truly means to be the castlefolk of Aurumice.
Gibberty shook his head, ever skeptical. The evening conversation's remainder was full of the usual pessimism, but Misa pressed on. She gave Alba a much-needed bag of medicines and herbs. She forced down the gruel, bid the castlefolk a good night, and left as the twin moons were high. Misa walked the gritty streets until the feculent dirt turned to cobbles and then to fine pavement. The houses grew from shanties to respectable little establishments. People on the affluent side of Trebalis could afford to add insect-repelling fruit oils into the street lanterns, the air sweet and free of the nasty insects. Misa shrugged off the too-warm cloak, shaking a few hitchhiking mosquitoes out of her hair. She wrapped her curls into a messy bun and approached a stable. She paid for the evening lodging of her mount.
That mare bit me twice, the stable boy complained as he took the payment. She's in the side corral.
Only twice?
Misa handed him an extra coin.
Count yourself lucky.
Frostfire, Misa's pretty red-speckled bicorn mare, paced angrily in the small pen. Her horns were pointed and sharp, making the creature as dangerous as she was beautiful. Frostfire whinnied as she saw her mistress.
Happy to see me? I heard you were an impolite guest.
Misa unlocked the gate, checked the saddle, and climbed on the creature's back.
Next time I'll bring you with me to visit our friends in Rockwood, and you can be itchy with bites for a week.
She clucked softly, and Frostfire walked down the lively night paths. They traveled near the River White, past the street market's illuminated stalls. Frostfire seemed to be in a good mood, and gave Misa little fuss. Misa loved the night market of Trebalis. It reminded her of the shopping malls on Earth, but out under the stars. There were so many tempting wares and tantalizing aromas. After buying a pastry, Misa took a side road down to the main thoroughfare through Trebalis and past the edge of the city. She urged Frostfire to a canter as the roads turned to dirt, and she traveled through the sparse farms. She breathed deeply, preferring the open air of the country. Bicorns had no concern for the night. Their vision was far superior to a simple farm horse. Frostfire easily raced through the darkness. The creature's hooves pounded the ground in a familiar rhythm. Overhead, the moons, Cuscia and Kaladi, were bright. Misa winced slightly as she passed through the energy field, but her mount showed no sign of concern. The barrier did not impact animals, only people. Misa was one of the few who could pass through the field without feeling the overwhelming crush of terror. Frostfire crossed the bridge, her hooves echoing on the wood. They rounded the stream and came to the field where the fireflies shimmered across the landscape, like stars fallen to earth. Misa arrived at the haunted halls of death and despair, encased in thorny rose vines, its grand facade crumbling away. She had arrived at Castle Aurumice, her cherished home. After turning Frostfire loose in the pasture, Misa went into the castle's dark, empty halls. There were hundreds of rooms, but the palace housed only 3 inhabitants: Misa, her brother Taran, and their close friend Nico. Misa walked through the wood-lined back entrance to the small 2-story white foyer. The chandeliers were dark, and the moonlight illuminated the ancient white carvings and statuary. Rats and vermin scattered around her. The more that time passed, the more forest life crept into Aurumice. Aurumice had a large grand ballroom and front entranceway. The castlefolk had always preferred the backside, closer to the stables and fields. It was more practical. Misa crossed through the red-carpeted halls. Without knocking, she entered her brother's quarters. The ornate room was decorated in purple hues and lit with elegant electric lamps. Taran's books were neatly organized, his bedding perfectly made. Taran was deep into a mournful melody, filling the room with the delicate trill of his violin. One would have never guessed the 2 were siblings. Misa's hair was a wild mass of dark auburn curls. Taran's hair was smooth, long, and as white as the wings of an angel moth. Her skin was ruddy, tanned, and dark. His skin was pale, his features sapien. The only trait they shared was their eyes, a deep, sparkling amethyst. Taran didn't acknowledge his sister and instead continued his sonata. As white as his skin, his violin sang through the opulent chamber. Misa unlaced her muddy boots. Taran stopped. "You smell like the back end of a cow."
The perfume you're referring to is rockwood.
She smirked. "You're asking for trouble when you go back to that place?"
That place?
Misa pulled off her jerk-cake boot.
That place is where most of the castlefolk are stuck, and they can't get out.
"Will you please not do that here? It is very difficult to keep this floor clean."
Taran set his violin delicately in its velvet case. "No, I'll leave these here to remind you that you're being an ass."
Misa wrestled out of her second boot. "The castlefolk are not stuck in Rockwood. They can move anywhere."
"But where, Taran? They have nothing. You can't move if you can't afford a horse and have no place to go."
Misa defiantly threw the boot on his bed, then wiped her hands on her pants. She took her brother's wine glass and settled into a chair. Slipping a small roll of elven weed from her pocket, she lit it with an old Bic lighter, one of her remaining trinkets of earth. Taran sighed.
"Don't give me that look,"
she growled.
"I need your help, and so do the castlefolk. I know how to break the gate to Pennsylvania."
"You said you were sure last time."
"No, really sure. I think I can have the gate open in a day's time. I want you to come with me to Aunt Lily's house."
Taran daintily picked up the mud-caked boots and swung them out the balcony window. He turned to his elder sister, grabbed the roll from Misa's fingers, and dropped it in the cup. "I'll consider it if you stop all of your unhealthy habits."
"This isn't about me. Taran, if we don't help our family, no one will. We are the adults now. Mom and Dad aren't coming back from the dead to fix this."
Misa slammed her cup on the tabletop, spilling ashy liquid all over the lace doily. "Hey!" Nico's voice growled from beyond the window glass. "Who hit me with that boot?" The tall, dark young man walked into the room by way of the balcony. His jacket shoulder was stained brown, presumably from the descending footwear. Nico was more Ailuro than either of the siblings. His teeth were fanged, his ears pointed, his fingers and toes well suited for climbing. He was leaner and more muscular, and had black tiger stripes down the side of his smooth face. Nico threw the dirty boot back into the room. Taran glared at him. "We're out of replacement light bulbs," Nico complained. "Do either of you have any?"
"Great," Misa grinned. "You can come with me to Pennsylvania tomorrow, and we can get replacement light bulbs."
You're not serious.
Nico settled into a high-backed chair. Oh, I am, she grinned. Then we will have the shadow sphere.
You think your Aunt Lily has the shadow sphere?
Yes.
And if she does, and if it can break down the force field, the castlefolk will come back, Nico asked.
Yes.
But then what happens next?
Nico was leading her through a mental game. Misa grinned but continued to answer his questions. The halls of Aurumice will be alive again with people. We'll have real food in the fields and real dinners and parties and game nights, and we won't be lonely.
You're missing a part of this, Nico said. When the force field is gone, what will the government of Trebalis do?
Misa smiled and looked away. Be happy that the River White is no longer blocked, and then the trade will resume. Nico leaned forward.
How about we jump to the part where I live the rest of my life in the mines of Briken for tax evasion?
No, it won't happen like that.
Misa, I love you, but I just do not believe you.
I am so sick of both of you not caring. Misa gritted her teeth. If you would just take 5 minutes and go visit the castlefolk, you would see how bad it is.
My magic is useless, and so is yours, Nico said. You should just leave it to Castle Nova and Polaris Academy to fix.
I don't think my magic is useless, Misa said. Nico, come look at the books I found and help me understand the gate and the force field. Nico shook his head.
It won't work.
Misa turned her attention to Taryn. You know Mom and Dad would be so disappointed in you right now. You could use your powers to help the castlefolk, she said.
Mom and Dad would prefer I stay safe, Taryn replied.
And you? She turned to Nico. What would your mother say? What would your grandfather say?
Stop invoking the names of the dead, he snapped. You're cruel.
I'll say and do what I want if it will get you to hear me, Nico.
My preference is to not die in prison, Nico replied, walking out to the balcony. Because that is how it will end. No one will forgive the castle.
I have that all worked out, Misa reassured. I have a deal with Katie and the mages.
Nico did not linger long enough to hear her plan. Instead, he climbed the rose-covered trellis down into the courtyard below.
Do you want to look at the books I've been working with?
Misa asked her brother again. Taryn shook his head. Misa, I know you feel responsible for what happened to the castlefolk. But this whole situation is going to end very badly. Aurumice is better off being the haunted castle in the forest.
No.
Misa touched the wall. Her eyes traced the ornate filigree that laced up to the ceiling.
The castle wants to feel alive again.